Okay, so welcome to this video, which is on storing pictures and images. Which I think, let's be honest, I think the videos so far on binary numbers and things like that, not probably the most exciting or real world relevant things. Um, but uh, but this video where we'll talk about how actually do we store visuals, images, and to an extent video, um, is I think a little more interesting. So we've got this one, and then the next video will be on sound, right? So which also again I think is a little more relevant and probably a little more mysterious, right? I mean, the idea of storing numbers, that's not really that exciting, and it's also not that mysterious to think about. Well, so there's a code for each key on the keyboard. That's not like that groundbreaking, I guess. Um, but as we move into these topics of images and then eventually sound, it is a little more interesting because, in particular, it's just much harder to, of course, be able to do these types of things. So we must need a, even more creative, I guess, approach to be able to do them. So, anyway, so where are we in our story of storing things in binary? So we certainly know to death how to do numbers at this point. Um, and the last video, or the second half of the last video, was mostly talking about how do we store characters and text. How do we, storing any keyboard operator with an ASCII code and things like that. So that's all great. We know how to do all of that. So we can appreciate that there's a binary code, a binary way of expressing numbers, letters, and pretty much any other text symbols that we might have. So what's next, right? Would be other types of things, other types of files or things we know are stored on a computer. So first up is how about images, right? How about pictures? What's that story? So we'll do that, and then next, like I said, we'll do sound and try to figure out something about how sound is stored as binary, right? I mean, I wasn't kidding when I said everything, absolutely everything is binary. This video you're watching right now, the fact that you can hear me, the fact that you can see me do red ink on these slides and things like that, everything, all of that somehow zeros and ones. So anyway, okay, so images and pictures is the lesson in this video. So the good news about this topic is that we can kind of a little bit appeal to our childhood and think about, how did we maybe first encounter pictures or images and coloring them and things like that. And to be honest, it's pretty much a similar story for how a computer captures and stores visuals. So let's say let's start basic, in terms of images. Obviously, we could get crazy and we will talk about big fancy cameras and how those work and everything. But let's start basic and say we just want to store the image of maybe the letter E um, on maybe just a grid like this. So, if you're going to do that, if you're going to say, well, all right, how do I even think about an image? I mean, right, is that maybe I at least have to define, well, where is the image, I guess, or, how do I associate location, right? Again, we're new turf here, right? Previously, we were just talking about letters and numbers. Okay, I don't have to think a lot about visual aspect of those. So in order to even get on the board, literally, I might say, well, let's say if I want to start with a basic image like just a box letter, maybe let me give us a grid so that we have some place to even imagine it. If I was going to draw it in, I might draw it in, I suppose, like that. And again, this is where thinking like a 5-year-old might be helpful. That you might say, well, you're going to color in, I guess you could say, right? You could say, I'm going to color in some of these boxes so that so that the image of an E appears. So, right? I mean, we might not have all drawn the same exact E, but especially if I'm constrained by sort of saying to myself, think about these boxes. What is it, 7 by 7? I said here, and you're going to need to put an E in there. I don't know. Some of us might have colored in this other box right here to say that the lengths, I guess, here maybe should all be the same. Who knows, right? But all right, that's a good first attempt at sort of trying to represent this. So, all right, so we've got a visual, at least, or an idea of what an image, a basic image in this case, might look like. But how do I try to think like a computer and say, well, what did I mean by color it in? And maybe more importantly, how do I distinguish this picture from the one I started with? Well, let's think like a computer and say, well, I can maybe think about saying some of the boxes are white and some of them are black, okay? And maybe I might consider 0 to mean, if I'm thinking about binary, a box that's white maybe could be coded with a 0, and a box that's black could maybe be coded with a 1. And the code then for my blank red is just all zeros, 0, 0, 0, 0 everywhere, so to speak. Whereas at least this one, I'd have some ones in these boxes that I could then maybe say, oh, that's a distinguishing characteristic, and maybe in fact, if I envision the ones where they're located, like I did over here on the right, we can sort of actually notice a couple things. One, if I was trying to say, what is this image? I'll use that word lightly, I guess, but this is an image. First of all, just as a human looking at it, you can almost kind of still see the E. Okay, that's kind of cute. But more importantly, right, this is just zeros and ones, right? This is binary. So in fact, if I wanted to save this image or store it or send it to somebody or whatever, all I'd have to do is send this, it's a long chain. There's 49 zeros and ones here. But all I'd have to do is send this chain. I could say 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, or I wrote it up here like this. And if I sent this to someone, assuming they knew that this was a 7 by 7 grid and that 0 means white and 1 means black, if I send this big long chain of 49 zeros and ones to someone, they could sort of reconstruct it and say, oh, okay, so I should come over here and do white, 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 black, 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 white, black, white, okay, and so on. And they could get this image. So as much as this is obviously sort of a silly, maybe just a silly basic example, it does convey the general idea of what I'm going to try to do in order to represent an image, which is to say there's sort of two components. One is this idea of making a grid, which we'll have a fancier name for that in a second. And two, I might think about a way of coloring it in with however many colors I might have. Now, if I just have binary, meaning every box is maybe just 0 or 1, I don't have a whole lot of colors to pick from. I mean, I could pick, instead of white and black, I could pick red and blue, I suppose. But if I just have binary, we know that that's just 0 and 1. I only have two choices for what each box might be. So at least maybe I should think a little more broadly and say, well, maybe I want more than just two options, black and white. Maybe I want to think about the idea of colors or having colors as part of my system here. Well, this is pretty easy to do. Rather than just saying 0 and 1 is white and black, I could maybe say, all right, how about you imagine in your grid that you're allowed to have maybe one of 4 colors, 0, 1, 2, or 3. And maybe those 4 codes, 0, 1, 2, 3, might correspond to red, purple, blue, or dark blue, and light blue, I guess. And in which case, I'd say, all right, so this figure up here with the zeros and ones corresponds, hopefully you can see, right, corresponds to this image down here. So that's kind of hopefully at least somewhat interesting, right, as a way of saying you're basically just going to try to come up with, again, a grid and color codes. I guess we would call this color codes that will go in each box. And then, of course, the idea being that each box should be filled in with the appropriate color that corresponds to the code. And that's the image that you would create. Now, I'll immediately call your attention to the fact that in this little system that we did here with the 4 colors, notice that if I just use 0, 1, 2, 3, which is reasonable to use as my color codes, how many bits do I need in order to store the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3? Well, if you remember back, and we're going to, believe me, cash in on all the stuff we said about binary. I can't store 4 different colors with just 1 bit. Remember, 1 bit is just a 0 or a 1, right? If I want to store 4 colors, I need to be able to represent the numbers 0 through 3. And you might remember, hopefully, that you need 2 bits in order to do that, right? I'd need to do all the codes 0, 0, that's red, 0, 1, that's purple, 2, remember, is 1, 0, and 3 is 1, 1, right? So these numbers, which I wrote them in our system, right, in the base 10 system, 0, 1, 2, 3. But in binary, right, these would actually each be 2 bits, right? I need 2 bits in order to represent these numbers. So actually up here, I should really probably, if I'm going to do this in binary, I'd need 2 bits in each box. Oh, okay. So that starts to hopefully make us think about the fact that if I want more colors, which we kind of know that's probably a good thing, I'm going to need to be prepared to require or to need more memory or more bits in each box in order to have a richer palette of colors. Okay, but this also sort of agrees with your intuition about images, which you get an image from someone, they email it to you, and it's not a very big file. You open it up and it's sort of like, oh, it's kind of crappy. Whereas somebody decides to send you this, professionally done photo that takes your computer, 5 minutes to download because it's so big, so much memory. When you open it up, it looks fantastic. Part of the reason is because you're using more memory. You know that if it takes longer to download, it's more memory. But that's corresponding to, among other things, more color options. Okay, so anyway, we'll talk about these ideas in this video. So it really does come down to, as silly as it sounds, that images really are basically just stored like a paint by number game, and wherein I might say, okay, how many colors do I have to pick from? This is mostly greens and browns here to make the Statue of Liberty. Really will, right? It really is going to be a question of trying to say, all right, which box or which area gets which color code. Oh, that's an 18, 18. I say, okay, that region then gets the color that goes with 18, and so on and so on. It really is pretty much that idea. All right, but let's get some terminology so we can try to make a little more sense of this, and we'll go back to black and white for now. So these are terms some of these are terms you've heard of just as a consumer. So first, every square, so we've been talking about this grid. So first of all, what do we call the components of these grids that we're going to chop it up into? Is called a pixel, which we've heard that term before. And a pixel is literally just a shortened expression for picture element. And all that means is that it's a box. It's one of these boxes. So if this is an image, even though it doesn't look super fantastic, each of these little squares that you see is a pixel. Okay, there's a gray one, there's a white one, and so on. So those are all pixels. If you collectively put all the pixels together and try to represent them, try to represent as the image, that's what's called a bitmap. So a bitmap would be this, right? Would be literally a map of the bits or a map of the pixels. So in this case, we're still sticking with just plain old black and white, 1 for black, 0 for white. So this image, which actually, if you back up, I know it looks like a big, I know this doesn't look like a fantastic image, but actually if you kind of squint your eyes a little bit, I think this is an eye, right? You can kind of see the eye, the dark part of the eye is there, and there's the white part, and there's sort of an eyebrow sort of thing happening there, I think. Anyway, but each of these boxes is either red, is either white or black. So in these zeros and ones, believe it or not, someone painfully went through and translated them over. These zeros and ones correspond to when is this black versus when is this white. So this is called a bitmap, this arrangement, I guess you would say, of all of the bits. And I don't know how many there are here, 100 or 200, maybe a couple hundred probably, zeros and ones here. That comprises the bitmap. And that's also would be equivalent to how many bits, in this case anyway, how many bits you'd need in order to store this image of an eye, of a sort of boxy eye. Monochrome images is just a fancy word for black and white, including just sort of shades of black and white, is called monochrome. So what's actually in each pixel? So what's actually stored there, and what are the elements that are going to go into sort of image quality, I guess. So this slide is sort of an overview for what we'll do in this video. So each pixel, to answer the easy question, what's stored in each pixel is a binary number. We'll talk about how big of a binary number it is. It could, meaning how many bits, right? So obviously binary is always just 0 or 1, but each pixel could have maybe 5 bits or 10 bits. But in any case, it's got some binary number stored in it, and that number is going to correspond to whatever color is supposed to be shaded in that pixel, right? So just like we saw before in just our simple example with the letter E that we drew, 0 or 1 tells you black or white, right? So, and even in a fancy image, even in an image on your computer or on your laptop right now, believe it or not, behind that photo that you took, that selfie you took an hour ago, believe it or not, stored behind that are just a bunch of zeros and ones that represent your selfie of, look how excited I am. I'm about to go listen to a lecture video. So, okay, so that's actually what is stored in each pixel is a binary number corresponding to what color should that box be colored in. So the quality of an image or the quality of a picture is influenced primarily by these two factors, and we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about each. Resolution, which refers to how many pixels are in your grid. So think about the grid that we started with, which I think was 7 by 7. I'm not going to get a photo quality image no matter what I do in a 7 by 7 grid like we started with. I'm going to just get sort of boxy looking things, which is fine if that's all I care about. But resolution refers to how many boxes or how many pixels are you going to chop your medium up into. Obviously, if I chop it up into a million boxes as opposed to 7 by 7, which is 49, you're going to have much more freedom and ability to represent reality. And mostly because, in terms of resolution, if you pack a lot more pixels into a box, into a region, you're going to have the ability to record a lot more color codes. Namely, you're also going to be able to represent things that are curvy, right? I mean, if we lived in a boxy world where everything was sort of straight edges and we wouldn't really need that fancy of a camera or anything like that. But since we know we live in a world of many colors and many curves, we want to be able to capture all that. Well, resolution, which again just refers to how much do you chop up your image into boxes, is going to play a big role in quality. All right. The other thing that's going to play a role in determining how good does something look is what's called the color depth. And the color depth just simply refers to how many colors, right? It's a pretty self-explanatory term, I think. How many colors can you pick from? So it's sort of the idea is, as the artist, how many paints are on your palette. If you're forced to make a painting in just black and white, okay, I mean, not that there isn't something nice about that, but you're not going to be able to capture all of the color differences that our eyes see with just black and white. So color depth refers to how many colors can you recognize if you're talking about a digital camera or your phone taking a picture. How many colors can your phone distinguish between? Or when the image is stored, how many colors are you picking from in order to create the image? So these two factors, right, should determine the quality, the visual quality of an image. All right. And for color depth, right, we looked at an example of 0 and 1. But remember, we looked at that other example where I said, well, what if we wanted 4 colors? I think these were the 4 colors, or maybe they weren't. But, right, the idea being that, all right, for black and white, I can get by with 1 bit because I only need to tell the difference between 2 options. But for 4 options, I needed 2 bits. I need the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there's going to be a trade-off, and obviously you guys probably know that the higher the resolution, the better the quality. The higher the color depth, the better the quality. However, both of them imply or both of them require more memory in order to make either of them improved. So this is, as usual, the trade-off. You want something to look better, you need more memory to do it. So let's take a little bit of time to talk about resolution and get a good handle on this half of the story. Right, so again, the resolution is just how many pixels are in your bitmap, or in other words, how many boxes are in this grid that you're going to split the image up into. Obviously, more pixels is better. And that would be, we would say we're increasing the resolution if we would say I have more pixels. Some cameras, I think, have the ability to just do, there's options that you can sort of pick. Do you want to take a low res, right, or low resolution image, which might be a little crude looking, but it's less memory, versus a very high resolution, right, or high definition, HD, when especially we use that term for TV. Same idea, that the resolution is much higher. But also so is the amount of data needed in order to represent these things. Okay, so how do you sort of describe resolution? Probably in one of 2 ways. You might give the dimensions of the map, of the bitmap, which is to say length times length by width. So in other words, you could say something like, oh, this bitmap has a resolution of 1920 by 1200, meaning 1920 bits, pixels by 1200 pixels. Okay, so, I did the math here. So that means, of course, in total, you guys know basic geometry, right? So the length times width tells you the area. So if you have 1920 down the one side and 1200 on the other, if you multiply, which apparently gives you about 2.3 million pixels, that's how many total pixels there would be in this image. Now, this is obviously a big number, 2.3 million, and you've maybe heard this term, a megapixel. Simply means 1 million pixels, and of course we're at the stage of technology where even your camera phone is able to capture many megapixels per image, per time you take a picture. I don't know what the sort of standard camera, I think it's maybe in the sort of 5 to 10 megapixels. And if you buy a camera, right, not one that's on your phone, but an actual camera, I'm sure you can get ones that are, tens or maybe even hundreds of megapixels. Which means, again, right, it's kind of crazy. Even 1 megapixel is saying that when you take a picture, you're chopping up whatever you're taking a picture of into 1 million little boxes and, capturing the color in those boxes and storing several bits, right? Maybe not just 1 bit, but you're storing then a binary number in each of these 1 million pixels. It's kind of, I don't know, it's a lot to think about. Right, and again, as I said this before, right, cameras are usually advertised with one of the numbers they give you is how many megapixels can it capture. So if it doesn't give you an actual number of megapixels, it may give you or I should say, if the number of megapixels, if you don't get dimensions like this, where it says, oh, it's this by this, usually the eye likes a 4:3 ratio of width to height. So, right, so width being obviously across, and probably you're looking at a monitor right now of some sort on a tablet or on a laptop, and just do a quick look. I just noticed as I was looking at my monitor, it's a little wider than it is tall, right? Even this slide actually is a little bit wider than it is tall. And that's because our eyes just generally like a 4:3, more of a 4:3 ratio. In other words, a little wider than tall. And you guys know also TVs. If you have a TV in whatever room you're in right now and you look at it, I'm pretty sure it's probably wider than it is tall. Um, so anyway, so that's resolution. So let's see sort of the effect of resolution. So um, by itself, resolution is just describing how many pixels. Now, so where do we kind of see the sort of effective resolution, I guess? Well, um, it certainly matters the size of the image that we're looking at. Now, these two images down here below, which are, I think, the old Endicott logos. I think it's been updated a little bit about a year or two ago, but you can obviously, I think, tell that there is a difference between the left and the right, and that even on your screen, you can hopefully see that the right looks a lot clearer than the one on the left. Now, they're about the same size, and I think they're probably almost exactly the same size. So one thing that I could say about what's the difference between the left and the right is that the left was taken with a much lower resolution. So in other words, when this image was captured, it was chopped up into, however many boxes. But when this image was captured, it was chopped up into a whole lot more boxes. Okay, I won't even hazard a guess, but let's say that this is 1,000 pixels. This might be more like 10,000 pixels. And just meaning, right, that when this image was captured, the camera that was capturing it didn't actually divide it into a whole lot of boxes. And so what did you end up with? I know this isn't super easy to see, but you ended up with, things that looked a little bit boxy, right? If you really focus in on these edges especially, it didn't really do a great job of capturing the curviness of the circle here. Instead, it sort of came out a little zigzaggy because it said, well, I tried to chop it up into boxes, but my boxes were pretty big. And so I didn't have a great resolution. So this is as good as you get. On the other hand, when you have a higher resolution, it can pretty well represent a curve. Now, of course, it isn't really curved, right? I promise you, the computer does not know how to do curvy things, but it can pretty accurately represent that by jamming a whole lot more boxes in here. Okay, so that's sort of a side-by-side comparison of low resolution, fewer pixels, and high resolution, more pixels. So that's one sort of discussion. The other is in terms of, well, what about the relationship between the actual physical size? Now, these are the same size, so it was reasonable to say that this came about from lower quality, lower resolution versus higher. But something else that we can talk about is, well, how big is the actual image, that you've printed or that you're viewing? So one other thing that's nice to sort of measure or get a handle on for when we're talking about resolution is how many pixels per inch, or pixels per square inch, really, but PPI, or pixels per inch, is a measurement that's used in order to describe to us how many pixels are there in a 1 by 1 inch square. Okay, so it's literally just trying to ask the question in a 1 inch by 1 inch, which I'll sort of try to approximate like that, in a 1 inch by, how many boxes, how many pixels are you cramming into a 1 inch by 1 inch space? Okay? Obviously, again, related to the idea of resolution in general, the higher the PPI, the better the image looks. Because again, right, you can capture these details, and especially curves, with this finer grid. So since high PPI is a good thing, how do you accomplish that? Well, having a high resolution camera would be one way to increase the PPI, but that of course costs extra memory in order to be able to say, well, I better chop this up into a million boxes as opposed to 10,000. Well, now I got a million bits versus 10,000 bits. Oh. And another way to do that is by messing around with the size. If you make an image smaller, and we've all done this, you look at something that doesn't look so good. But if you shrink it, right, make it smaller, it would look better, right? Because you'd increase the PPI because it's the same number of pixels. If this is 10,000 pixels, and currently it's in, I don't know, what does that look like? About 3 inches by 3 inches, maybe on my screen anyway. If I shrink that down to 1 inch by 1 inch, by shrinking it, I'd increase the PPI because now instead of being spread out over 3 by 3 inches by 3 inches, it's 1 inch by 1 inch. And in fact, that if you shrink this image down, it probably turns out to look a little more like this one because the PPI improves. However, that may not be exactly what you want to do. So what's the opposite of good resolution is bad resolution, and this is what I think we call pixelation. So when the PPI is too low, then, like we saw in the last picture, an image can appear boxy or blocky, and that's known as pixelation, or we'd say the image is pixelated. Obviously, this is to be avoided if you can, but what is this caused by? Of course, right, the idea is that when you're looking at an image, if you have a low PPI, that means you're looking at a region that probably should have been chopped up into more boxes in order to capture the complexity of the image. All right, so when do we typically encounter PPI, a low PPI or pixelation? Well, if you've ever taken a look at, maybe an image that was captured on maybe an older digital camera, maybe from 15 or 20 years ago, in the sort of earlier generations of digital cameras, they didn't have great resolution. They weren't doing 2 megapixels. They were doing, who knows, maybe 50,000 pixels. And, if you take a picture of the Grand Canyon or something very big, chopping it up into 50,000 boxes is probably going to produce an image that's not fantastic. So you might get pixelation or just sort of a bad visual quality because maybe your device has low resolution. Or more commonly, this maybe occurs to us in our lives, is when a small version of an image looks okay, has a reasonable PPI, but you try to blow it up, you try to make it bigger, and that of course decreases the PPI because it's the same number of pixels, but you're spreading it out over a bigger region. It sort of exposes the fact that it doesn't really have enough data in order to fill in the picture accurately, and you get pixelation. So you get something like this, right? The logo looked okay in this sort of maybe 3 inch by 3 inch size, but you blow it up to be, 10 inches by 10 inches, or it's probably not that big, but 6 inches by 6 inches, and all of a sudden, the same image that looked okay in this size, now looks this familiar sort of boxy, pixelated issue that we had before. This being caused not by the fact that the resolution was worse, but by the fact that you made the PPI worse by making it too big. Okay, so to try to talk a little bit, bringing us back to memory then, how much memory do you need in order to store these guys? So we have a pretty good grasp on resolution. And if we're just talking about black and white, 0 for white and 1 for black, then the resolution would actually just be equal to how much memory you need. In other words, if you're saying you're just going to put a 0 or a 1, that's 1 bit, right? 0 or 1, that's 1 bit. In each box, in each pixel, then I would only be using 1 bit per pixel. And so I'd say, all right, for black and white, that's good enough because I only need to be able to tell the difference between these two. In which case I would say if it's 1 bit per pixel, then the resolution, which is how many pixels, would also be equal to the amount of memory needed. Right, so you capture a 3.3 megapixel image. That's actually 3.3 million pixels. But if you're only using 1 bit, right, again, which is just pure black and white, you'd only need 3.3 million bits, which isn't that many bits. Remember, there's 3 bits. I'm sorry, there's 8 bits in a byte. So if you divided that by 8, it'd be how many bytes? So we're talking about maybe some megabytes of memory. Not huge, right? Not huge by today's standards. Um, but of course, probably, or it's likely that black and white isn't maybe quite good enough. So instead, we want to try to think about color depth, and by that I mean being able to distinguish between more than just 2 options, black and white. And we talked about this a little bit already, so let me try to be a little quicker here. So what if we, instead of saying 1 bit per pixel, we increase to say 2 bits? Now, if we still are trying to stick with sort of a monochrome idea, then maybe I won't add colors, but I could at least add maybe shades. And so if I have 2 bits, right, if I have 2 bits per pixel now, that means I can make 4 codes. Here they are, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? I can make 4 binary codes, and so I'm allowed to use 4 colors. So if I'm just sticking with white and black, I could at least maybe have white and black and 2 shades of gray. Now, here's our image. It doesn't look so hot. It's pixelated, or it's low resolution. That's just black and white. 1 bit per pixel. But if I make it even just a small difference of being able to add 2 more colors, what did your art teacher say? Of course, well, adding more shades or adding more colors lets you indicate shades and tones, which, believe it or not, just adding a little more color depth turns this image into this image. And it's not perfect, right? But you can see it's notably better, I think. Now, why does the edge look better? Well, I didn't add pixels. This is the same resolution images as the one on the right. So I didn't chop it up finer to say, capture this edge, this curvy edge better. But what did I add is I added the ability to not just do just white and black, which is what you see on the left, but I also said you could do light gray and dark gray. And so how did this get improved so much? It is actually notably much better. Is that rather than having to go right from white, which is of course very bright, and black, which is of course very dark, I was allowed to come into some of these boxes that are sort of on the frame here or on the edge here, especially think about the ones that stick out as really being boxy in this picture. Some of those were able to be colored maybe light gray or dark gray. So this border here, this edge here, looks pretty smooth. Now it's not, again, it's not because I chopped it up more. It's because I'm allowed to use other shades to sort of indicate gradual transition in color from white to black. It's kind of amazing, right? I mean, it's sort of, the human eye, of course, is a wonderful thing, but we're sort of able to fool it a little bit, I guess, here, and say, even just adding a couple of other shades, kind of somewhat magically, created the ability to represent a curve much, much more cleanly than over here with just 2 colors. So, anyway, okay, I don't think I have to convince you that more colors is probably a good thing. So this is what's known as color depth. And again, this is the other main component in visual quality. We have resolution that we talked about. And here's color depth. Okay, so color depth refers to, it can sort of be used in a couple of different ways, but it refers to how many colors you can recognize, or you could say it's how many bits per pixel, how many codes, right? How many bits you're going to use to make your codes for your color palette. Right, and of course, higher color depth will improve the quality, but if you want more colors, you need more bits, which of course corresponds to more memory. So in my picture on the right, if this had been chopped up into, let's say, 10,000 pixels, this is also 10,000 pixels because the resolution is the same. But in each of these pixels, I put just a 0 or a 1 bit, black or white. And in this box, in this picture over here, If I drop, it's divided up into, again, just 10,000 pixels, 10,000 boxes. But in each box, I have to put a 2-bit code in order to represent which of these 4 colors should get colored in. Oh, okay, so the bitmap of this just has 1 bit in each box, but the bitmap for this has 2 bits. Oh, well, that's twice as much memory. All right, well, I stop at 2. How about if I go to 3? If I am allowed to have 3 bits, 3-bit codes, hopefully you remember that this, maybe I won't do that fast, right? This relationship, which we saw with when we were talking about binary, that if I take 2 to how many bits, that should tell you the number of codes, which now for us codes are colors, you can make, right? So we had this relationship before. I think on a previous slide, it probably said something like for n bits, you can have 2 to the n different codes. Well, here we're going to use codes now to represent the colors. So the number of colors you might use, or that you can use, is determined by 2 to the power how many bits are you going to allow yourself per pixel. So again, in terms of quality down here, 1 bit per pixel was just white-black. That's our sort of crappy image. 2 bits per pixel, that's our 2 shades of gray that we just talked about, gives me 4 shades, 4 colors that I could pick from. And of course, 2 squared is 4. That's how I get this. And if I go up to 3 bits per pixel, then I should have, what, 2 to the 3, which is 8 possible colors. And notice the difference is actually not super noticeable, but I think you can tell a little bit, especially look at some of the details in here, right? In this image, these sort of got a little bit, I don't know what, polka dotted almost a little bit, I think with probably black and this sort of dark gray. Whereas over here, it was able to sort of spread it and smooth it into the fact that you had 8 possible colors, so there were many shades of gray used to create this image. And again, even the edges, which look decent, are even better in this picture. Okay? So of course, if each image is, let's say 10,000 pixels, because each of these 3 images has the same resolution, but just different amounts of memory or different numbers of colors, the first image is 1 bit per box. This second image is 2, and this third image is 3. So if you have 100,000 pixels or 100,000 boxes, then you should need 100,000, 200,000, or 300,000 bits. Okay, so to get twice as many colors, right? This again is 2 colors, 4 colors, 8 colors, right? Double, double. You don't need twice as much memory, right? I mean, these are doubled just by coincidence. But to go from the middle picture to the right picture, it's not twice as much memory, but you do get twice as many colors. Okay, so this is sort of some of the beauty of binary, is that you don't need to necessarily, it doesn't grow at quite the rate that you might fear. So how does color actually happen, I guess, is maybe something we should talk about a little bit. It's not magic, I don't think. So if we want to get color, right, not just black and white and shades of gray and things like that, we want real colors. Let's first at least acknowledge the physical nature of how do colors exist and are created. And again, elementary school is a good friend for us here. I think we remember that you can mix primary colors, I think we called them, of red, blue, and yellow. You can mix those in these combinations to get purple, green, and orange. And so we can kind of use that idea, right, that mixing colors in some way, shape, or form is actually a way to create maybe all colors, or more than one color anyway. So there's 2 different color concepts, I guess, or color theories, I called them, that are part of our lives: reflective and additive. So let's talk about each just real briefly. So reflective color refers to printed materials. So maybe magazines, photos, wherever they might be printed. and your printer, right? Probably, the physical printing of an item uses what's called reflective color. And you know this, I think, right? The color cartridge that's in your printer right now doesn't have 200 colors or even 50 colors, and yet it prints very nice photos. So how does it able to shade in, that perfect skin hue or whatever that is captured in your photo? Well, it's making colors, as you might imagine, by taking various combinations of our old friends, blue, red, and yellow. Now, since computer science people couldn't be nice and say, BRY or blue, red, yellow, instead they call blue cyan. I don't have a good story for you about that. And instead of red, it's magenta. Now, I think this has something to do with the fact that they're not, when you picture red, it's not quite magenta, but actually the color in your printer cartridge is magenta. Anyway, we know that we learned in elementary school, that you can make the main colors by mixing these three, and actually you can make any color using these three colors, except black, right? If you mix them all together, you get brown or something like that, right? So why does your printer need a black ink cartridge? It isn't just because the man is trying to screw you and make you buy 2 ink cartridges. It's because you can't make black out of these colors. So you have to have a separate, or at least you have to have access to black, right? So I'm not telling you something you don't know, right? But the way that your printer or printed material attains color is via a combination of these 3 colors. And if you need black, it's there. And this is known as a CMYK for, as you can see here, the acronym for combinations of cyan, magenta, yellow. And then I don't know why it isn't just B at the end for black, but for some reason it's K for black. And this is the standard procedure for any sort of ink and printed material. So where else do we see color? Well, we see color in lighted mediums, right? So maybe our most common example of that is that right now you're all looking at some sort of a screen, which isn't printed, right? And I think we all know that if you see this green here, it isn't because there's green ink, or I should say yellow and blue ink mixed together. It's because of the idea that this green that you see down here is illuminated. Well, how does this system differ? Well, first of all, it's called additive color to talk about lighted color, which of course occurs in TVs or any sort of monitors or displays. Now, what system does this use? Surprisingly, it does not use red, yellow, blue, like our printing system, right, which used basically red, yellow, blue, and black. For lighted color, we actually use red, green, and blue, as opposed to yellow, which, I have no cute story for you as to exactly why that's true. However, the same principle applies, that if you mix varying amounts of red, green, and blue light, you can make any color you want. And this I thought was a cute image here, that actually if you take a green light and a red light, and mix them or overlap them, you get yellow, which is kind of funny in the sense of, I don't know whether they knew that when they made traffic lights to be green, yellow, and red, but maybe they did. But as you can see, you can get purple and other colors as well. So now how do you get black from lighted color? Well, you don't need black because it's just dark, right? So any surface that's illuminated, if you just don't illuminate it or don't illuminate part of it, that's how you get black. So right now on your screen, these letters I think are black. How is it knowing that that's black? It's not colored black, and it's not like black light, right? I think you know that, right? There's just that right here, nothing is on. There is no illumination right here on this D. Okay, but the blue that's up here, and again, all the colors that are down here, in your monitor, or whatever you're watching this on, there are lights, right? There are light bulbs, you could say, that have color filters in red, green, and blue, and various amounts of them are turned on or off in order to make any color combination that you might want. So that's sort of at least the physical of how color is, I guess, created or represented. So we're not going to spend more time than just that talking about that. So back to then, now that we can appreciate color, let's see this implications of color in terms of memory and quality. Okay, so again, color depth refers to, you can kind of use it to mean either thing, either the number of colors that you can use, or you could maybe say the number of bits per pixel, since they tell you the same idea, right? And again, remember, the number of colors you can use is 2 to the number of bits per pixel, right? So rather than just doing black and white, like here, this would be probably 1 bit per pixel, 0 and 1s for white and black. Instead, we might say, how about if I use 3 bits? Well, we know that gives 3 bits, gives me 8 options, and maybe I pick this basic color palette to represent, to be represented by the numbers 0 through 7. Okay, that's these codes here. There's 8 codes, and these are just the numbers that in our world would be the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so on. What would this image turn into? It would turn into this one. Now again, this isn't the best picture of a parrot that I've ever seen, because it only is using 8 colors. This is only saying each pixel in this image here is one of these 8 colors, which is better than the black and white, I guess, although some might say this is sort of more artistic, I suppose. This certainly shows greater detail, right? The head of the parrot in this picture was just white, 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 white everywhere. But in this one, at least we can see, oh yeah, there's sort of an eye and yellow feathers, and then some other light feathers, and then red feathers. Okay, right, so obviously you get more detail with the colors. It's still probably not great, but all right, it's an improvement. All right, so with improved color depth, so I would say the color depth of this image here, you could either say is 8 colors, or you could say it's 3 bits per pixel. Those mean the same thing. All right? So let's try to get to more photo quality then, right? So let's say we want to use more than 3 bits. Again, we just always have the idea that however many bits you have, it's 2 to that number, gives you how many colors are in your palette, right? How many colors can you use? So let's take a look at the evolution of this image. I think it's actually pretty neat to look at it. That if you just have 1 bit per pixel, right? So the bits per pixel are down here at the bottom. So the color depth is down here at the bottom. So 1 bit, you only get 2 colors, black, white. 2 bits, you could maybe have 4 colors, and they're actually here on the right side of each of these images. So if you're allowed to have 2 bits, that's 2 squared, so that's 4 colors. And they chose still white and black, but then maybe a gray and 1 shade of red. You'd get this. Okay, an improvement. This is the picture we looked at a second ago, right? If you have 3 bits, you can have 8 colors. If you have 4 bits per pixel, you can do 2 to the 4, which of course is 16 colors. So you can kind of really maybe now for the first time, really start to see, oh, you know what, if you do multiple shades of red, which you can see there's several of them on this palette, you can then start to do shadows, right, and show depth, literally color depth, but also it's 3D, right? These images more or less look 2D, right? You can't really get a sense of depth, even in this one. It still kind of looks flat, right? It looks two-dimensional. But here I can see shadows, so I start to sort of understand, oh, you know what, it's 3D. This wing is sort of in front of the rest of this and stuff like that. Okay, and then if we go maybe just a little more, we go to 8 bits, which is a byte, right? So 1 byte per box, per pixel. You can actually have 2 to the 8, which is 256 colors. So this is maybe an exaggeration, but look on the right here. This is the color grid. These are the colors that you can pick from. Lots of shades of red, lots of shades of green. and you get and you end up with an image which looks pretty good, right? I mean, that's maybe reasonable photo quality image, and for that maybe I need 8 bits per pixel, which gives me 256 colors to pick from when I'm coloring in my boxes. Okay, so so then to talk about how much memory do you need to store these things, again, let's just throw out a number and say each of these is maybe 100 pixels by 100 pixels, so the resolution is maybe 10,000 pixels. Then if you're just doing 1 bit per pixel, and there's 10,000 pixels, obviously, you'd use 10,000 bits. If you use 2 bits per pixel, 20,000, 3 is 30, 4 is 40, and 8 is 80. So again, notice though, in order to get better quality, yes, you do need to spend more memory. We kind of assumed that that was the case. But I mean, in the end, it's not that much more. I mean, yes, this is twice the amount of memory as this one, but you get way more than twice the number of colors. Remember, this was 16 colors. This is 256 colors, okay, which is 16 times 16 actually. So you get 16 times improved quality, I guess, for just double the memory. Um, so of course, yes, you should take this into account, right? You don't want to sort of willy-nilly do this, but it's not, it's a reasonable thing. And why, now that computers have, lots and lots of memory, so storing something that's, I mean, in 80,000 bits, remember, there's 8 bits in a byte. So this is 10,000 bytes. That's 10 kilobytes. 10 kilobytes is takes zero point 0.1 seconds for a 10 kilobyte file to download. Um, an essay that you wrote, a 3-page paper that you wrote, is probably about 10 kilobytes. So this is no memory. This is super, super fast. And it's a pretty good quality image. Okay, so what are we, right? So a recurring theme is that we built computers sort of in our image. So the idea of storing images should sort of be like, well, what is our resolution? What is our color depth? And by that I mean our eyes. Well, this is obviously a hard thing to exactly quantify, but it's believed that our eyes can distinguish between about 10 million, whoops, sorry, that should be an extra zero there, 10 million different colors our eyes can tell the difference between. Again, I don't know where they get this from, but who's the poor guy that had to sit there and say, can you tell the difference between this shade of light blue and the other shade of light blue? But anyway, it's believed that our eyes have the capability of distinguishing between about 10 million different colors. So in other words, the color depth of our eyes is about 10 million, which means if you want a computer to store an image that is lifelike, since our eyes can tell the difference between 10 million colors, a photo or whatever should be stored also with the capability of distinguishing between 10 million colors. Crazy, right? Can you imagine thinking up names for all 10 million colors? But it's the truth. So how many bits do you need in order to get 10 million color codes? Well, we could do our usual trick, right? Remember, it's 2 to the number of bits. Tells you how many codes. So how do I cross over the 10 million mark? You need to go all the way up to 24 bits. So 2 to the 24 is 16.8 million. That's the first number that's over this, right? Because 2 to the 23 would be half of this, which would be, what, 8.4 million? So that means that our eyes would still be smarter, or be able to see more things if we only use 23 bits. We would say, hey, when I look at this actual parrot, I can notice a little more detail than in this image you took of it. But if I use 24 bits, that means the image will be stored being able to distinguish 16.8 million different colors. my eye will see that the same in the image as it does in real life. Assuming all the other things are, assuming you have a good resolution and all that. All right, so how do we, 24, right? That's huge, right? That is a lot, right? That's 3 bytes per pixel. And again, thinking about your camera, your phone, which is taking millions, the resolution is millions of pixels, and each pixel is 3 bytes. Okay, now that's how you get to these big photo files, which are usually pretty large. So how do we use 24 bits in order to visualize, create the image? Well, actually, what they do is they say, all right, 24 bits, that's 3 groups of 8. Remember, 8 bits is a byte. So what they actually do is they take a byte, which is 3 bits, right? Is 8 bits, I'm sorry, 8 bits is a byte. The first byte tells you what shade of red. So if you can believe it, there's 2 to the 8 shades of red. That's 256 different shades of red. Then there's 256 shades of blue and green. And the code, this 24-bit code, is going to give you 3 different 8-bit codes. The first 8-bit code tells you, oh, that's red 01100101. Combine that with the green shade 111000101 and the blue shade whatever, and that creates that exact shade of the t-shirt that the person in the image is wearing. So it's kind of crazy. Oh, and this is called true color, I should say, as it makes sense to call it that, right? The 24-bit color depth, or the 24-bit color system, which again is able to recognize over 16 million different colors. It's called true color, and this is the standard color depth for TVs and monitors, high definition anyway. And in terms of photos, same idea, right? Instead of red, blue, green, it's red, yellow, blue, right? But the same idea that this many bits is what's needed in order to represent what we believe our eyes are capable of distinguishing. So here's probably a dramatization a little bit, but in an attempt to kind of show you that, right? 2 bits per pixel, which is just 4 colors. Okay, kind of looks like that. 4 bits, which gives you 16 colors. 8 bits, which gives you 2 to the 8, which is 256 colors. I mean, that looks pretty good, but maybe in the background not perfect. In true color, 24 bits, which again is this insane 16 million different colors and shades and everything. I mean, wow, right? Totally clear. Now we're limited by the resolution, for example, of the screen you're looking at this on. If you were trying to view this on a monitor that's 20 years old, probably none of these pictures look all that great. So I'll go ahead and hope that you're looking at it on a reasonable screen here. So, just a quick word or two about capturing images and what happens and how does this all work out. Let me make sure I'm doing okay with battery. Yes, okay. So just two more slides here. So how do we actually capture these images, right? We've all used a digital camera on our phone or an actual digital camera or some other device, maybe a scanner, right? Any of these devices which are able to digitize an image. So I should say digitizing is just a fancy word that means taking something from the real world and coding it in binary. So that's the idea of digitizing something, is saying, well, I see in front of me a parrot. That's our world, or that's analog, you could say. That's the real world. And I need to convert that to a picture of a parrot, which is zeros and ones. So digitizing is the term to say, how does that happen? So of course, right, cameras, phones, scanners, other devices you might think of, video cameras, for example, are all examples of digitizers, right? Things that are able to take something from the real world and turn it into binary, into zeros and ones. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the video, right, these devices are advertised in how good are they at capturing images, and that's measured in, again, the two factors. And if you go and look, if you're in the market for a digital camera or even a new cell phone, it's going to tell you both of these things as part of the specifications. It's going to say, oh, the camera has a resolution of 10 megapixels or something like that. And it probably also tells you color depth. It's a lesser advertised thing. But if you're actually buying a camera for real, you probably can. It'll probably say, it might say true color, or some other color depth reading. The device, the camera that we're doing, has these things pre-programmed into it, right? It says, oh, okay, I'm going to always, when I take a photo, right, with this device, it sees the image through the lens. I won't get into the physics of all of that, but you all look through a camera or look through your phone as you were trying to focus it and all that stuff. So what is it that it's doing? It's viewing the image. But then what is it immediately doing is that it's, of course, has as part of it a resolution. And saying, okay, I'm a 10 megapixel camera, which means when I take an image, I divide up the lens, right, what am I looking at, into, if it's 10 megapixels, into 10 million boxes. And you literally just put sort of a grid on it. And this is all happening sort of as you're taking the photo, as you're taking the picture. It says, all right, I'm going to chop myself up into whatever my resolution is. Obviously, higher resolution means you're about to split this image into more boxes. And then when you capture the image, you take the photo, what immediately, and it really is pretty immediate nowadays, happens is that each pixel, right, all 10 million of them, gets assigned a color code. And what is that color code? Well, the lens on your camera or on your phone, if you take a picture of a parrot, it sees it, and it says, okay, now grab me the color code in every one of these 10 million boxes. Well, as you might imagine, you're maybe not going to necessarily get, 10 million boxes, right? That means each box is really, really small. You might not get that in that box, it's always the same shade of red. So what is it going to pick? And this is sort of what is amazing about technology, is that it instantly decides, well, what's the predominant color in this box? So it looks up whatever its color depth is for your camera. Let's say it can recognize this 16 million different colors. It's crazy, right? There's 10 million pixels and 16 million colors, and in an instant, it chops up the image, it chops up what it's looking at into 10 million boxes, and in every one of those boxes, it decides between the 16 million colors, or however many it might have, and it says, oh, that's a box that's color code 010011100011, whatever, and that's stored. That's stored in that box. It does that for all the pixels, and that is what is made up in the JPEG or whatever format your camera or phone stores that image. It's there. Those zeros and ones are instantly there in the memory of your phone or of your camera. So it's kind of crazy, right, to sort of think all of that happens when you hit that button. You might think twice about taking, the 37 versions of the selfie for you to Snapchat to somebody. But that's what's happening every time you hit that button, which is why you can't hit it like super, super fast, right? On your phone, if you try to like rapid fire, it's like, okay, buddy, you got to at least give me like a second or two, because it's trying to store tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions in some cases of zeros and ones real quick, right? So like, it's like, okay, give me a minute. I got to record all those. You're just going to delete me anyway. So that's actually what's happening when you do this. So let me give you a little animation of that, right? So here's our friend sitting on a branch. And when you push, take picture, whatever that might be, button on your camera or on your phone, what happens? So first thing that happens is that you get a grid. this is the resolution, right? So I don't know how many little boxes are over here in our friend here, but of the hundreds in this image, it sort of gets subdivided, right? And it says, all right, each of these boxes now on my grid, in each of these boxes, I'm going to try to decide what is the predominant color in each box. Now let's look at some cases that are going to be troublesome, right? So, for example, maybe this box here, right? Or these boxes. These are sort of part black for the background and part orange or whatever the color the feathers are. So it's going to look at a box like this one, maybe that my mouse is on right now, and it's going to more or less try to decide, okay, of the many colors that are in here, which one occupies the most space, and that whole pixel is going to get that color. So that one that I'm pointing to right now looks like the dark color probably wins over the light color. So I'm guessing when this image is processed, that particular box is going to be rather dark, which as we know is going to lead to a certain amount of pixelation, because it shouldn't be, right? First of all, it should be two different colors. It should be allowed to be a dark color and a light color. That's a problem. And the fact that it's probably going to be all dark means it's going to look like you took a little, you gouged a few feathers out of that corner of the bird, right? So, but let's see what happens, right? So we get chopped up, and then, right, it makes a decision instantaneously, seemingly, right, of what's the predominant color. It looks up that color code in its chart, its color chart, and says, okay, that box gets the code 0100 whatever for that shade of that dark color, and that's recorded in the bitmap. So what happens when I do this last step? So take one last look at our friend here. In his perfect form, he gets turned into this. Okay, the image jumped a little bit, so I don't know that I can quite play detective and figure out where that box was that we just were on, but maybe it was right there. I'm going to make an assertion that maybe it was, right? And of course what happened is that it ended up darker than it probably should have, right? And this is a little bit for exaggeration's sake, but that's what happened, right? And you can see his nose sort of got cut off a little bit because, the boxes that were right there were mostly black with just a little bit of light. And so, but they got sort of smoothed out into the darkness there, which is why I don't know how many boxes were up here, only a couple hundred. That's not a sufficient resolution in order to get a good image. You'd need a much, much higher resolution to get something that really looks like a parrot. So, but anyway, that's a little bit of the story of what your camera or your phone is actually doing, which is pretty cool. Okay, so just to wrap up I think the key concepts here, image quality is really mostly attributed to the two factors: resolution, how many boxes, how many pixels, and color depth, how many colors or how many bits per pixel are you going to use. Together, this should tell you the total amount of memory needed for an image. So if you say the resolution is 1 megapixel, which is 10,000, a million pixels, that'd be the resolution. And you say the color depth is, let's say, 8 bits per pixel, because you're going to do 2 to the 8, which is 256 colors. So you use a color depth of 8 bits per pixel, and there's a million pixels, then obviously it's a million times 8 bits per pixel. And so 8 million bits, or 1 million bytes, which is a megabyte, which is a somewhat reasonable amount of memory for a photo, or an image of some sort at least. Okay, so how much memory does a photo or an image take? Just multiply the two, right? The conversion for color depth is, of course, that, as always, 2 to how many bits you have tells you how many codes. And for us, in this chapter, codes represents colors. For viewing images, the PPI is a sort of better evaluator, I guess, of quality. So PPI just refers to how many pixels per inch or per square inch do you have in your storage. Color depth certainly also contributes to the image's quality, right? So it isn't just the resolution. Right, so these two together should determine how good an image actually looks. So we didn't do a whole lot of problems along the way here, just a few kind of odds and ends, I guess, concepts anyway. So now that you're done with sort of the lecture part of this, in order to give you a little bit of practice, there's a handout or a file, I guess, with just some questions that kind of involve all of this stuff, and lets us play around a little bit with these concepts and hopefully get comfortable with them. So I wanted to do it in a separate video just because this is already long. So try the practice problem. So there'll be a document, a file that's posted in this module that I think just says image problems or image examples or something like that. So click on that, and there's a bunch of problems in there. Try them. I think probably you'd be better off trying them rather than sort of cheating, I guess, and knowing the answers. Try them. You've seen the lesson, so maybe try them. That's not the homework. So the homework, as usual, is in Canvas. But try those practice problems, we'll call them those first. I'm going to make a separate video where I do the problems so that you can check yourself and also probably watch that video too. I mean, unless you get absolutely everything right, probably watch that in order to pick up a couple of other tips. So do those, and then after you're done with all of that, I would say then you're ready to try the actual homework problems as usual in Canvas, in the Canvas quiz. So, okay, so good luck with this. Hopefully this was a little bit less dry than just doing binary and hexadecimal and stuff like that. The next video or next week's stuff is on sound, which again I think is also pretty neat to try to think about how is sound stored. But we'll do that. We'll do that next week, and then we should be at a good sort of stopping point for our first exam. So, okay, so good luck with these practice problems, and also then with the homework problems.